This is a very common theme out there that people are honing in on, which is, can you trust what's happening with respect to news? Doesn't matter if it's CBC or CTV.
The media has been relentless in their push to oust Pierre Poilievre as leader of the Conservatives. But something has changed. The same voices that once echoed the narrative are starting to push back. Even their own panelists and peers are calling it out. Is this the beginning of a reckoning for Canada's mainstream media? Let's take a look.
Well, first of all, CBC has had to correct the falsehoods that they put into that story. So I encourage you to tell Canadians about the falsehoods you published and explain why you did that.
Okay, just on that last point, there was an article published on Sunday on cbc.ca that was later updated with what the editors decided to call a correction. The initial version of the story accurately reported what Chris d'Entremont said in an interview on a CBC program. Chris d'Entremont later called back, clarified those comments, and the story was updated to reflect that. The correction is by Chris d'Entremont. The mistake, or the bad impression, whatever you want to say about it, was from Chris d'Entremont. It was not an editorial mistake by the CBC writer.
All right. So you have a kind of a nervous David Cochrane having to speak to what Pierre was saying and calling out the CBC. And we're like, oh, that wasn't us. That was Chris d'Entremont. It wasn't us. Okay. But you took what Chris d'Entremont said as gospel and you said that's what happened. So, yeah, that's kind of a problem. And it didn't seem like you actually believed or took into play what was actually said from the other side of the coin, which was Andrew Scheer, Chris Warkentin, and the opposition office. But I digress. And then he immediately goes into it. So what do you think about the aggression there? Right after, he says, well, we talked about Nate Erskine's fist for one day. We get some points for that. How many days is this for Pierre Poilievre? I've lost count. How many days was it for Nate Erskine? So, oh, 1 day. 1 day, an active MP of the Liberal Party calling out their own budget on video. No ambiguity. It's right there. So, please, Mr. Cochrane, this is not an equal share of coverage here. Don't even start. But here's Lisa.
Sure. I think two things going on here. Number one, in order to refute the story out there that the problem is with Pierre's leadership, they're going to try to impeach the witness. The witness in this case, Chris d'Entremont, and they're showing prior inconsistent statements, which is a very clear tactic that's been used for many, many years, if not for all of time, in terms of making sure that you're getting your point across, that the person who said the things that really are trying to harm you can't be believed, can't be taken at their word. And they're putting out examples of it, the speech that you just showed before, and other indications of what he may have said to his constituents in the past. So that's the route they're going to take on how to deal with the Chris d'Entremont story. The other aspect with respect to the CBC reporter. Look, David, I was just for the last couple of days in the UK. And as you probably know from the news over there, the head of the BBC and the head of the BBC News have both resigned because of something that happened with respect to a Donald Trump speech way back in January. It was around January 6th, at the time of insurrection. Anyway, it would appear that they pushed two pieces of video together. They didn't separate them, made it seem that Mr. Trump was saying one thing and not the other. And they both got fired over it because it proved to be incorrect. It was, as Donald Trump says, fake news. And now Donald Trump's suing them for $1 billion. Why am I telling you this? This is a very common theme out there that people are honing in on, which is, can you trust what's happening with respect to news? Doesn't matter if it's CBC or CTV. Both of them actually got glancing blows from Poilievre today in the press conference. But it's a theme that's happening around the world. And unfortunately, in the case of BBC, it proved to be correct.
Good for Lisa Ray there, because that was a warning to the CBC and CTV and Canadian media, saying, listen, people are seeing this. This is why people are not trusting news. And as much as people want to say that it's the MAGA movement or the Maple MAGA movement or the far right Canadian, like whatever you want to denigrate these people with, it's not a fantasy. Because Lisa's just calling out one of the most recent examples. We had one in the last parliament with CTV that doctored something together that made Pierre look like something that he did. Now, they're lucky that Pierre didn't launch a $1 billion lawsuit against CTV. But she's saying, listen, it's happening. It's out there. So it's interesting that she's saying, pay attention, folks. You wonder why your ratings are going down? This is why. Fascinating to see her just call that out right to David Cochrane's face live on air. Very, very interesting. Anyway, we're going to jump forward a bit to another segment.
Lisa, we mentioned the January leadership review, not to suggest there's any real doubt, but just because it's a milestone that he kind of needs to put behind him to move ahead. But, the party has become as much a movement. There's a lot of movement conservatives there because of Pierre Poilievre who've rallied to him. I mean, while he's pulled that together, it did prove not to be enough. And if you have more days like today, does that just deepen the negative feelings that exist outside of the people already committed to vote Conservative? Is that the risk you run here?
Yeah, I think the risk is the analysis that I'm hearing today that we're taking this moment in time as the way things are going to be into the future. Let me paint a little bit of a different picture for you, because I do think that Pierre's tone is going to match a time in the future that will be actually beneficial to the Conservatives. And it's this kind of situation. We're 8 months since the election. We're continuing along the ways of talking about major projects. We're stretching into a year, maybe 14, 15 months. Employment keeps sinking. We keep having problems with inflation, and we're not seeing projects happen, and we're not seeing people feel the impacts of the promises that are being made by the Liberals. And then you have the tone of somebody who's saying, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight everyone. I'm going to fight everyone I can for you because you are not being treated fairly. That's the moment in time when tone meets what's happening on the ground in Canada. And that is not a situation that is not foreseeable. It is very foreseeable. So yeah, Pierre's going to stick to who he is and what he knows. And at some point in time, if the Liberals do not pull this off, they are on a very short leash on a timeline that's probably unfair to them, quite frankly, as a government. But that is the reality of our situation.
So what you didn't hear before this was every other panelist that was pro-liberal, and they were saying, well, Pierre's just, he's bringing toxicity and, similar to Donald Trump, they're trying to paint him as Donald Trump, right? And they're saying that, his message was resonating at one point, but now it doesn't make sense, and Canadians aren't buying into that. And whenever you hear media people say Canadians aren't thinking this, Canadians aren't buying into that, they are telling Canadians, this is what you need to think. It's a tactic that they use. So if you do watch mainstream media at all, I know a lot of you don't anymore for this reason, but if you do, keep an eye on that, because that's psychological manipulation going on there. And it's very underhanded, and it's completely dishonest, because I don't need some ridiculous pundit on there telling me what I think. You don't need to say that. You should just say what you think, because you have no idea what Canadians think. Pretty obvious at that. And there was all of this analysis saying, Pierre's missed the boat, and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And then Lisa comes back and is like, so you're trying to frame this to me as basically Pierre's done, which is what we're hearing over and over and over again. And she's saying, I don't think so. Because when the Liberals don't deliver, and this is what we've been saying for a couple of months now, when the Liberals don't deliver, this messaging that he's using right now is going to be spot on. And it is going to match. Because from what we've heard on the project list that has been put out today, none of this stuff is going to get done anytime soon. It's still going to be stuck with the government to figure it out. So you're not going to see this stuff for years. And that's going to be a major problem for Mark Carney. And what Mark Carney is going to rely upon is optics and say, see, we're getting stuff done. No, new jobs aren't coming in because none of this stuff, yeah, you may have approved it in your project office, but what does that even mean? Does that mean shovels are going in the ground? No, it doesn't. Because there's still a bunch of government crap to do to actually prove that this agency is worth paying the CEO $700,000 that you hired them for. So, yeah. Anyway, kudos to Lisa Ray on that. And she wasn't done. She wasn't done, and she saved the best for last. And this is a segment that CBC didn't bother to upload to YouTube.
Kearney and Smith are like Ford and Freeland. It is a remarkable political dynamic. But Lisa, just on that point, like creating that, yes, I'm on it, I've got a plan. Is that enough? Like for now, you know, that it's a priority, it's a focus, and you're seeing activity, you know, at least in a process sense, if you're not actually seeing the specific outcomes. Is that enough for people right now?
Maybe, but I'm going to put my cynical hat on right now and say that I'm not surprised the Globe and Mail got a bit of a taste as to what's in the announcement, given that Marco Rubio was in Niagara-on-the-Lake today. Nobody's talking about the fact that we didn't push him on why we can't get back to the table on negotiating a deal with the United States. Minister Anand was asked about it, and she said, I didn't bring it up because it's somebody else's file. We should be talking about that. That's an important opportunity for us to try to get back to the table. And yet we're talking about Pierre Poilievre, and we're talking about announcements of lists of stuff that won't get filled for 15 years.
Okay, but on that, I mean, should the Foreign Affairs Minister be talking to the Secretary of State on trade when Ambassador Hillman's talking to Jameson Greer, Howard Lutnick, and Dom LeBlanc, Donald Trump, and Mark Carney are talking? Like, she'd get in trouble with this Prime Minister, wouldn't she? You know, and Rubio might too.
No, I would say if we take a Team Canada approach and if we encourage people to talk across the border to anybody they possibly can about the importance of the relationship, then you take every opportunity you possibly can to talk about the importance of the relationship. You don't say, I didn't bring it up at all.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Give Lisa the last word there because we're out of time. I got to go. Thank you to the Power Panel.
Awesome pushback there. And I love that she called out that, you know, why aren't we talking about all of these other issues? You know, no one seems to be bothered in the media that we just lost our negotiating position with the United States. No one seems to be talking about that at all. Isn't that the major story? Because thousands upon thousands of Canadians are losing their jobs because of these stupid tariffs, and Mark Carney has given away all of the leverage. He, by all accounts, you can believe who you want, saw an ad, didn't say anything about it, okayed it with Ford, and then goes to apologize Donald Trump afterwards. But we're not sitting down with him. And Lisa's saying, why isn't anybody talking about this? And why isn't anybody talking about Anita Anand saying, well, you know, not my job. Not your job. You're the Minister of Foreign Affairs. What do you mean, not your job? That's literally your job, to talk to people in foreign countries. That's kind of what foreign affairs means. And then you see David Cochrane shamelessly trying to defend the Liberal government. Well, you know, it's this person that's supposed to talk to this person, this person's supposed to talk to this person, you know, and she'd get in a lot of trouble, you know, if she did that. And then Lisa's looking at him incredulously, saying, no. Didn't you hear what I heard during the election? Didn't you hear what I heard after the election? Mark Carney lecturing everybody on a Team Canada approach, and you need to be doing whatever you can. Where's the Team Canada approach now? Huh? Or is this just politically convenient for Mark Carney to say, Orange man bad, politically advantageous for me, and yeah, I don't need any of my people talking to their people trying to sit back down at the table because it's politically convenient for me. Never mind thousands of people are losing their jobs. Never mind I'm announcing some projects that are not going to get going for years and years and years. They're not even going to start building them for years, folks. Now, is that a bad thing long term for Canada? Maybe, maybe not. But it may be a really good thing in the short term for the Conservatives. Think back to what Lisa said before. There's going to be a time period very shortly where what Pierre Poilievre is saying in his narrative Remember, he's been regarded by many as almost like Nostradamus. I'm not saying he's psychic, but he's able to read the tea leaves of the economy. He's able to read the tea leaves of the political chessboard and anticipate what's coming and zero in on that. And this is what he's talking about now. So these projects that have been announced that are just, they're mineral mines and stuff like that. And mines are okay. We need mines, but we don't need the government getting in the way, and they're still there. If these mines were announced that, hey, private enterprises are coming in and they're going to be starting in the next few months, that's a different story. It's a different announcement, because that means Canadian jobs, Canadian paychecks, Canadian workers, Canadian prosperity, Canadian GDP. Awesome. But that's not what's going on here. And Brian Lilly put out a recent video, and he seems to think that that's not what's going on here either.
Mark Carney wants a majority government. And if he doesn't get one by poaching MPs, expect him to look to do a snap election in the spring. Why? To get that majority. But 43-40 is not good. They need to do something to undermine Poilievre. And if he's gone, well, Conservatives have to have a leadership contest. They have to find someone and build them up, and they won't be ready. So good for the Liberals, they'll get their majority. But if Poilievre's there and they are still in that 43-40, and then perhaps something happens in the election campaign, guess what? The Conservatives could even win, especially if voters become more concerned about affordability, the cost of living, the cost of groceries, the cost of housing. If those issues and not Donald Trump are at the fore, well, we know that voters prefer the Conservatives on those issues. So this whole thing going on with Conservatives are waiting in the wings to defect is all psychological warfare by the Liberals on the Conservatives.
Even Brian Lilly on our show and here, this is completely flying in the face of what the media is talking about, right? And Brian's being very fair. He's not being pro-conservative there. He's being objective, which is his job. Kudos to Brian. One of the few out there that's actually able to do that. He calls out good things when it comes to the Liberals, as he should, but he also calls out negative things on them as well. And same with Pierre Poilievre, puts his good opinions out there about them and puts his negative opinions out there. So this is what we're kind of seeing, and this is why we were saying this budget needs to pass, because you need Canadians to say, all right, Mark Carney, you've had all the opportunity to do everything that you said that you would do. Where's the results? And they're not going to see any. They're not going to see any by next spring. And that's not on the Conservatives. That's on Mark Carney. Remember, he was saying, we're going to be doing things at speeds no one has seen in generations. Okay, well, we're not. So you're the one who promised that, and that's what got you elected. And guess what, Mark Carney? Canadians are going to see the speeds at which your government moves, and it is not going to be moving at the speed not seen in generations. It's going to be moving at the speed of every generation, which is slow and molasses. And that, Mr. Carney, is what's going to get you in trouble in the next spring election.